I'm Tracy Sabol. Tonight on EWTN News Nightly, debt limit bill. President Joe Biden and House Speaker Kevin McCarthy reach an agreement on the debt ceiling. We're on Capitol Hill. A rare attack. Russia reports a recent drone strike on its capital caused light damage. How Kyiv is responding. A temporary halt. A South Carolina judge places a hold on the state's recent 6-week abortion ban. What legislative leaders are saying about the life-saving law. And reflection, not reaction. Pope Francis introduces new guidelines for using social media in a more peaceful way. These stories and more tonight.
From EWTN, the Global Catholic Network, this is EWTN News Nightly.
Thank you for being with us on the Feast of St. Joan of Arc. Our top story tonight, over the weekend, President Joe Biden and Speaker Kevin McCarthy agreed to raise the debt ceiling. Now the pressure is on for congressional leaders to sell the deal to their members. Meanwhile, the clock is ticking to get it done by the June 5th deadline. Capitol Hill correspondent Eric Rosales joins us now with the latest. Eric.
Well, Tracy, good evening. Lawmakers returned to Washington, D.C. after the Memorial Day break. Faced with a major time crunch in less than a week, the Fiscal Responsibility Act has to make its way through both the House and the Senate, where majorities are slim. But House Speaker Kevin McCarthy continues to say that he is confident it will pass.
It has historic reductions in spending, consequential reforms that will lift people out of poverty into the workforce, rein in government overreach. There are no new taxes, no new government programs.
What's in the Fiscal Responsibility Act? House Republicans say it will raise the debt ceiling until early 2025, cut spending by about $2.1 trillion, increase defense and VA funding, take back $28 billion in unspent COVID relief, and redirect IRS funding, and tighten work requirements for many on food stamps. But the House Freedom Caucus says it falls short of the budget passed by House Republicans.
Not one Republican should vote for this deal. It is a bad deal. No one sent us here to borrow an additional $4 trillion to get absolutely nothing in return.
House Democrats are still sizing up the bill.
Republicans said that they wanted to cut the deficit. And let's be clear that what they got from this was not that. They are not cutting the deficit and they are not cutting spending.
The Senate is in a holding pattern until the House acts. Republican leader Mitch McConnell thinks the agreement is a good deal, writing in part, debt limit increase comes with serious steps to rein in Washington Democrats' addiction to reckless spending. The Senate must act swiftly and pass this agreement without unnecessary delay. But it doesn't sit well with Republican Senator Lindsey Graham, who tweeted, I will use all powers available to me in the Senate to have amendment votes to undo this catastrophe for defense. I support raising the debt limit for 90 days to give us a chance to correct this disaster for defense. House Speaker Kevin McCarthy is signed Wednesday night for a vote on the bill. If it does pass, Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer says that he plans to bring it to the Senate floor as soon as possible, even if that means lawmakers have to stay throughout the weekend. But just a short time ago, Congressman Dan Bishop of North Carolina became the first Republican to support ousting Speaker McCarthy. He said any motion to remove the Speaker would be made in conjunction with other Republicans. At the Capitol, Eric Rosales, EWTN News Nightly.
President Joe Biden says he feels good about the debt ceiling and budget deal negotiated with House Speaker Kevin McCarthy. President Biden spent part of the Memorial Day holiday working the phones, calling lawmakers in both parties, as a default would almost certainly crush the U.S. economy. White House correspondent Owen Jensen reports. Owen?
Tracy, President Joe Biden calls it a bipartisan deal and is confident that it should get a vote in both houses. Meanwhile, in the press briefing room today, the White House budget director, who's been in the thick of the negotiations, stepped up to the podium.
In the press briefing room today, White House Budget Director Shalonda Young tells reporters,
I can assure you that this was no easy task to get here, but what was on the line for the American people was real. I know I breathed a little easier.
And with June 5th ever so close,
this agreement is now with the United States House and then on to the Senate, and we strongly urge both chambers to pass the bill and send it to the president's desk.
Earlier, the Office of Management and Budget also issued a statement of administration policy, writing, "The Congress has a solemn obligation to prevent default. The administration strongly supports H.R. 3746, the Fiscal Responsibility Act of 2023, which reflects a bipartisan compromise to avoid a first-ever default and protect our nation's hard-earned and historic economic recovery." President Joe Biden spoke about the budget deal over the holiday weekend, but he did not talk to reporters when he returned to the White House today. The president was coming back from Delaware, where he made 2 unannounced stops, first attending a memorial mass for his late son, Beau, then traveling to Veterans Memorial Park in Newcastle, where he laid flowers to pay his respects. Meanwhile, Vice President Kamala Harris releases a video today on Twitter where in one segment she brings up faith and abortion.
And if you agree, one does not have to abandon their faith or deeply held beliefs to agree that the government should not tell a woman what to do with her own body.
While pro-life group Live Action recently tweeted, "The pro-life position is that all humans have human rights. The first right is life, the right to not be killed."
Now, tomorrow, the president heads to Colorado, and he'll give the commencement address at the Air Force Academy the following day. And we're also learning that next week, President Biden will host British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak at the White House for talks, and no doubt those talks will center around Ukraine, where the war shows no signs of abating tonight. At the White House, Owen Jensen, EWTN News Nightly.
Well, a judge in South Carolina has placed a temporary hold on a recently signed 6-week abortion ban. The new law is similar to a 2021 heartbeat law, which was struck down by the state Supreme Court. Pro-life lawmakers say the new law makes technical tweaks and should sway at least one justice. We go now to Mary Margaret Olahan, senior reporter at the Daily Signal. Mary Margaret, always great to have you on. A lot to get to, but first, I want to get your thoughts on the South Carolina judge putting a temporary halt on the state's pro-life heartbeat law. Where do you see this going?
Well, it's a really interesting little situation we have here, Tracy, because this is one of a number of heartbeat laws that have been kind of aggressively sought after by these pro-abortion groups. They like to say that women don't know they're pregnant by 6 weeks, and so that's a reason why we shouldn't have a heartbeat law. And if you look at a lot of major abortion outlets, major corporate media outlets reporting on this issue, they won't even say heartbeat. They'll say fetal cardiac activity or something like that. And so as we know, this law was blocked by the South Carolina judge. It'll be really interesting to see what happens next. We know that the full weight of the abortion machine is behind blocking this law and many others across the country.
Yeah, and Mary Margaret, something else. Last week, we also saw multiple attacks on pro-lifers, one in New York where a professor yelled profanities at a group of students and then destroyed their pro-life display. And then another one in Baltimore where 2 pro-life sidewalk counselors were physically attacked outside of a Planned Parenthood. One man reportedly went to the hospital with a fractured bone in his face. What more do you know about this particular incident?
Yes, so we've been diving into this story today, finding more and more details about what happened outside this Baltimore Planned Parenthood facility. We know that 2 men, aged 73 and 80, were out there doing sidewalk counseling, which is pro-life work outside this Planned Parenthood clinic. And a man came up, and according to police, there's video footage of this man just assaulting one of these elderly pro-life activists out of nowhere. And when his friend went to his aid, this unidentified man again assaulted this other pro-life activist to the point where this man, whose name was Crosby, ended up at the University of Maryland shock treatment facility because he was so badly injured. And the photographs of these men's injuries are really horrible. You know, we had to blur them out for our story. They're so graphic. His eye is so puffed up that it's closed and there's blood everywhere. His cheek is lacerated. There's blood coming out of his mouth and his eyes. It's very upsetting. And we spoke to police about this today, and they told us they haven't identified who the perpetrator was yet, but they have seen the video footage from a security guard who was in the vicinity, and there were several witnesses who saw this incident happen. So we'll be following it, trying to get more information on what was going on here and who this perpetrator was. But as we know, Tracy, this is one of many different incidents of attacks on pro-life groups or pro-life organizations' buildings and Catholic churches across the nation. There's been an uptick in this violence since the Dobbs leak in May 2022, when we found out that Roe v. Wade was going to be overturned. And there's been very little proper response from federal authorities on this.
Yeah, and it seems these attacks are just getting more and more extreme. Another thing I want to touch on, another story that I know that you've been reporting on, the internal policies at Fox News regarding gender, especially gender transition policies. What did you find out?
Well, we obtained a leaked copy of Fox's gender transition policies, as you were saying, and that was a very interesting document to get a hold of, because while we know that Fox is very vocal about covering a lot of this woke ideology, this policy itself shows that Fox allows employees to use the bathroom that aligns with their gender identity. They also say that they'll help employees come up with a workplace transition plan. That's a workplace plan to cope with changing your gender or attempting to change your gender to become a man or a woman when you are a biological man or a biological woman. And that plan includes different items such as when you're going to start using the bathroom that aligns with your gender identity, when you want your coworkers to find out that you no longer believe that you're a woman or a man, and more. We also spoke to a bunch of different Fox employees who formerly were at the company, who told us that this is kind of emblematic of where Fox is at, that they are duping viewers on where they stand on a lot of these issues. There was one former producer for Tucker Carlson Tonight that told us that they struggled with this kind of thing all the time, and that they even struggled to have the proper pronouns for Dylan Mulvaney, a biological man who believes that he is a woman, in their chyrons.
Well, Mary Margaret, so much more we can talk about. Unfortunately, we're out of time. Thank you so much, as always, for coming on and for your insights. Always appreciate it.
Of course. Thank you.
Our residential buildings were hit by drones in Moscow early today in what Russia is calling a terrorist attack by Ukraine. The Russians claim the drones caused minimal damage and some were shot down on their way into Moscow. Ukraine's presidential advisor denies involvement. 2 people received treatment for injuries. Turkey's longtime president is staying in power. Recep Erdogan secured a strong new mandate in a runoff election over the weekend. Philip Crowther, affiliate reporter with the Associated Press, has more from Turkey.
Recep Tayyip Erdogan is now extending his increasingly authoritarian rule here in Turkey into a 3rd decade. The Turkish president now faces a host of challenges in this deeply divided country. There's the battered economy, skyrocketing inflation, the need to rebuild after a devastating earthquake. And there's also public pressure for the repatriation of Syrian refugees. Erdogan has been trying to mend fences with Syrian President Assad, this after years of backing opposition fighters trying to depose him. Erdogan is likely to move ahead with recent efforts to normalize relationships with other countries of the Middle East. That includes Israel, Egypt, the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia. Turkey could, though, temper some positions that have irritated its NATO allies. Erdogan may be willing to lift his objection to Sweden's membership of NATO, but observers predict that Erdogan is unlikely to depart from his policy of engaging with both Russia and the West. Erdogan has that tendency to play both sides, like buying Russian-made military equipment and refusing to enforce sanctions against Moscow, and at the same time providing drones for Ukraine. This attitude has often irked his allies, but it also often makes him indispensable. Western leaders rush to congratulate him, even though they say they remain concerned about his increasingly authoritarian turn. That includes crackdowns on free speech and rhetoric targeting the LGBTQ community, and those threats could get worse over the next 5 years. Opposition challenger Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu had promised to put Turkey on a more democratic path and improve relations with the West. Erdogan has promised none of that.
We thank Philip for that report. And we have a lot more still to come on EWTN News Nightly, including encounters of love. Pope Francis encourages a more humane way of using social media among the faithful. And we take a look at how 2 veterans are reaching out to service members as Mental Health Awareness Month comes to a close. The Vatican has elevated the Diocese of Las Vegas to a metropolitan archdiocese. The Nevada city is one of the fastest growing in America, with a population of around 2.3 million people. More than 600,000 of them are Catholics. Previously, Las Vegas, Reno, and Salt Lake City in Utah fell under the Metropolitan Archdiocese of San Francisco. Pope Francis resumed his normal schedule over the weekend after canceling events on Friday because of a fever.
Nel nome del Padre, del Figlio e dello Spirito Santo.
Amen. The Holy Father celebrated Mass for the Feast of Pentecost at the Vatican on Sunday. The 86-year-old has sparked concerns with his fever a couple of days earlier. During his Regina Caeli address over the weekend, the Holy Father announced a special day of prayer dedicated to the work of the Synod on synodality. Pope Francis has called on the faithful to ask the Virgin Mary to watch over the upcoming synod. Many Marian shrines around the world will participate in a special day of prayer tomorrow. The month of May is traditionally dedicated to Mary. The Vatican released a new document yesterday urging the faithful to be reflective, not reactive, on social media. The 20-page pastoral reflection addresses challenges Catholics face when using social media platforms. It raises red flags over social media pitfalls, including information overload and constant demand for people's attention. Joining us now from Rome is Andreas Tannhauser, EWTN Vatican Bureau Chief. Andreas, great to see you. Can you tell us more about these guidelines?
Sure, Tracy. So yesterday, the Vatican's Dicastery for Communications, that is Pope Francis's official communications department, presented a new document on social media. This so-called pastoral reflection uses the parable of the Good Samaritan as an analogy, helping us to make social media more humane. Many will not associate the Vatican or Pope Francis immediately with social media, but the Holy Father has quite some reach in the new media. @Pontifex, this is the English-speaking Twitter account, for instance, has more than 18 million followers. And across the other 8 languages that Pope Francis is tweeting in, he has more than 50 million followers. So add to that Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, and then you can see that the Vatican has a quite impressive influence in the new media world. The communications department actually does know what they're speaking about when issuing a guideline for how to use social media from a church perspective.
And Andreas, can you give us an overview of exactly what the Vatican suggests when it comes to social media?
So there are 5 things described as pitfalls in this document. First, the digital divide. We should be aware that not everyone has the same access to the digital world. Many are left out and are left behind. Second, the digital space is a commercial space. We pay with our attention span for using platforms that appear to be free, but in fact have been created to earn money. Third, fake news is also a growing concern, according to the document. While everyone advocates for transparency, the lines between fact and fiction blur easily in the digital world. Fourth, there is the echo chamber phenomenon. Online, we primarily encounter people who share the same interests and the same ideas, and that creates a new form of tribalism. And fifth, the misperceived anonymity of the digital space triggers aggressive and violent behavior at times. Many are therefore hurt in the digital world, having suffered from cyberbullying and exclusion. This document reminds us also that God only can be experienced in real life and real relationships. But after all, this document, Tracy, is not a condemnation of everything digital. It's quite on the contrary. It is nuanced and encourages us to use social media along the lines of the parable of the Good Samaritan. Our digital encounters should be encounters of love, of help, of support. And these new social media guidelines encourage each and everyone to be beacons of hope and messengers of Christ in the digital world. Also, the World Wide Web can and should be used for reaching people for Christ.
And Andreas, I'm curious, on a personal level, are these new digital guidelines from the Vatican, do you find them to be helpful for you, and do they inform your use of social media?
Yeah, Tracy, I honestly think they're very useful. I have teenage kids myself, and the use of social media and digital devices is a big topic in our family. This new document gives great advice when it comes to the family and our exposure to digitalization. It also helps me to reflect as a father, how often do my older kids and younger kids see me with maybe a cell phone, working, reading, or doing whatever with it, and how often do I put it down intentionally and take time for them? So the new guidelines encourage us to do an examination of conscience, as they call it, on our digital behavior. A great recommendation, in my opinion, Tracy.
Absolutely. Andres, thank you so much for this report. We appreciate it. Up next on EWTN News Nightly, Over, Never Out, how 2 U.S. veterans are helping those struggling with mental health conditions. Plus, Forgotten Country, a post office in Kansas honors a holy hero. May is designated not only as Mental Health Awareness Month, but also Military Appreciation Month. And in honor of that, some military veterans are raising their voices to reach out to former service members.
Just hold on, reach out, check on your buddies. There's no easy way out.
Well, the band Over, Never Out released this song in hopes of helping veterans who may be struggling with depression. According to federal data reported by NBC News, in the month of March alone, a suicide hotline for former service members received 88,000 calls, texts, and chats. And joining us now, he is one of the members of Over Never Out, Jason Chris Hauk. He also spent 23 years in the U.S. Army and served several tours in Afghanistan. Jason, good to be with you, and thank you so much for your service. First off, tell us about your band and where the idea for the song came from.
Thanks for having me. So the band kind of formed around the idea of this song. I started working with Tony Barnes, who was a former Nashville talent, and we had a plan to write a song. We didn't know what it was going to be about, but we landed on this issue because so many people that we know in our community outside of Fort Bragg, North Carolina, were struggling with suicide or the aftermath of suicide in certain families. So that's what we actually formed the band around. It's an all-volunteer group of people. It's about 11 of us in our little orchestra that came together to work on this project. So we were not a band before this.
And tell us, Jason, why, outreach to our veterans and their mental health is really so close to your heart.
Close to me because I've seen so many people struggle with this throughout my life, and especially in the veteran population that I'm a part of now. But I saw it on active duty as well. It's been an issue that the military has been dealing with, really struggling with since 2005. And it has not gotten better. It's gotten worse. Since 2001, only less than 10,000 people were killed in war zones, but over 100,000 have died by suicide. So we're on the wrong side of this trend, and it's something we have to get our arms around. So we need to raise awareness and also offer a path of hope to those who are in crisis.
Yeah, and we mentioned that you served in the Army and you did several tours in Afghanistan. And I know that after the U.S. pulled out of Afghanistan, many service members and veterans suffered a great deal mentally and emotionally. Can you quickly talk to us about that and why it could be really so hard for them to reach out for help?
Yeah, the final evacuation from Afghanistan and the way that was left really hit the veteran community hard, especially around Fort Bragg, where so many Afghan war veterans live and have served. So that was so painful in so many ways and something people couldn't get past. That was one of the reasons that led me towards this song. Reaching out is a hard thing, and that's what we put these lyrics in there very specifically. When I wrote this, we want to make every word count. It is hard for somebody who's in a dark place of crisis to reach out. So the real message of the song is for other veterans who are doing okay to reach out and check on their buddies and to tell those in crisis to hold on, that help is coming, that we're going to try to get reinforcements and pull them out of this. It is a tough thing to ask for help when you are struggling. I know this from my experience. Other band members know this. I think a lot of people who have spoken to us after listening to the song have said, yes, exactly. Every word means something very special to them. especially those who have struggled with suicide.
Jason, we probably have maybe 20 seconds left or so, but how can folks get more information about this song, and how can they help?
They can go to our website and find out how they can help. It's holdonreachoutsong.com. All they have to do to help us raise money for this effort is listen to the song or buy the song. But even better, go to the donate and resource page and give your time and your money to the organizations across America that are trying to help the Department of Defense and the VA to reverse this crisis.
And they certainly have all of our prayers as well. Jason, great talking with you. Thank you for your service, and thank you for what you're doing.
Thanks for having us on.
Finally tonight, a post office in Kansas is being named after a Catholic Army chaplain who died as a prisoner of war back in 1951. Father Emil Capon served during the Korean War and regularly celebrated Mass with troops on the battlefield. He was captured by communists in 1950 and eventually died of malnutrition. One lawmaker says the post office will honor, quote, an American hero. The post office is about 20 minutes from the priest's hometown in Pilsen, Kansas. We thank you for watching tonight, and remember, you can follow us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at EWTN News Nightly. I'm Tracy Sabol. Good night, and God bless.